Chris Spear from the American Trucking Association, the president, said next year we're going to go after these plaintiff attorneys, the billboard attorneys that are trying to turn the trucking industry into an ATM machine. And he said, I thought that was a valiant cause. He said, Bob, I wonder if we could fight that with data. I said, Steve, whatever your idea is, I'm in. Let's go after it.
Plaintiff attorneys trying to turn the trucking industry into an ATM machine. Hence, Bluewire was formed to fight it. Join us this week. We have Bob from Bluewire, and he explains how Bluewire closes the ATM machine.
Welcome to the Trucking Risk and Insurance Podcast.
Bob, welcome to the show. And can you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved with Bluewire? And then tell us a little bit about Bluewire and what it does.
Sure. Chris and John, hey, thanks so much for having me on that show today. Really appreciate the business of safety, Dawg, and what you guys do for the industry. And it's a pleasure to be with two guys that I consider good friends. Thank you very much. My background has really been on the private fleet side of the motor carrier transportation world. I started in 1977 in the driver staffing business in the U.S. And in 1992, I sold my company to an outfit in St. Louis, CPC Logistics, and spent the next 28 years with CPC and ultimately became one of the principal partners in the company. And CPC provided truck operators to many of the large Fortune 500 companies that you'd be familiar with, folks like Walgreens and John Deere and Benjamin Moore Paint Company, Mullen, the Bose Speaker Company, Honda, Toyota, and firms like that, companies that had their own private fleet delivering products to either a warehouse operation or retail store network, or in some cases, even an ultimate consumer. And so I spent my career really working on the private side. I was very active with the National Private Truck Council out of Washington, D.C., spent almost 40 years with that group, served on the board 4 or 5 times, was very active with that group. So that was my background. In 2007, I ran into a guy named Steve Bryan, who was attending a little industry event that we were at. And Steve had come from the data world and was just making his first foray in the trucking business, and had been told that regulated industries like transportation really needed data and technology to help them. And so Steve was kind of looking for a project. And about that time, the government was working on their infamous CSA project. And so Steve and I talked in those early days. I tried to help Steve get a little acclimated to the trucking world, and picked up on the CSA looming ahead, and really became a thought leader for the industry. He was out doing many conference shows, speaker events, a large part with the American Trucking Association and the various partners of theirs, to really get out and evangelize the word about CSA, what it was, how it worked, etc. In the process, he was developing a software system called Vigilo to monitor that CSA platform. And the company took off, went really well. And a couple of years ago, Steve sold that business to a company called Samba Safety out of Denver, Colorado. And so Steve was just sort of winding down his relationship there at Samba. I had just sold my interest in CPC Logistics in mid-2020, right after the COVID environment had really started to hit the business world. And I thought it was maybe time for me to retire. And I bought my friend's boat and had it shipped out from Missouri to California. And I thought, okay, I'm gonna sail up into the sunset and retire on my boat. And about 10 days after retirement, Steve called me up on the phone and he said, "Hey, Bob, I've got this great idea." He said, back in 2019, Chris Spear from the American Trucking Association, the president, said next year we're going to go after these plaintiff attorneys, the billboard attorneys that are trying to turn the trucking industry into an ATM machine. And Steve said, I thought that was a valiant cause. He said, Bob, I wonder if we could fight that with data. And knowing Steve the way I did and his successful path, and the fact that we went back a number of years to 2007-8, where we first formed our friendship, I said, Steve, whatever your idea is, I'm in. Let's go after it. Let's start a business. And so we formed Bluewire and started to do some research about the industry and the issues that were related to this. And some of the guiding information for us was really came out of the American Trucking Association's research arm, the American Transportation Research Institute, or ATRI. And in June of 2020, they came out with a very important document about nuclear verdicts and the impact on the trucking industry. And we used much of that data to form our idea about how to go after this problem and attack. And then subsequently in November of 2021, ATRI came out with a second study that was more focused on the smaller verdicts and some of the larger verdicts, but smaller than nuclear. And that was kind of an important piece for us too, to really get a grip on how these nuclear verdicts were impacting the trucking industry.
I'll tell you, the nuclear verdicts are certainly impacting, but as you alluded to, all verdicts that are anything more than 100,000, I think, are really having a negative impact on the trucking industry as well.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, we're going to talk about nuclear verdicts a lot, but lead us through this thing that I don't understand called the reptile theory, because it leads, as I understand it, and fill me in, it leads to nuclear verdicts, does it not?
It does. It's a very unique approach. Again, started in around 2008. There was a book that was put out called The Reptile Theory, and it's on Amazon. You can purchase the paperback for $1,600, I believe is the current going price. It's pretty amazing. And
$1,600 for a book?
$1,600. The two original attorneys that crafted this theory produced the book, and it's for sale on Amazon. We usually include a picture of that offering in our slide decks as we sell Bluewire. But yes, it's an extremely hard book to find and very pricey. But it's really used as the Bible for a lot of the plaintiffs' attorneys to develop their game plan for attacking not only motor carriers, but other high-profile type cases where these nuclear verdicts are prevalent.
And yeah, sorry.
So the theory
got me going $1,600. But
yeah, so we can get over that one. But the theory really is, take the Warner case, for example. You're probably familiar. It was one of the very first highly publicized cases in the nuclear venue. And the Warner case involved kind of a poor weather condition day. The Warner truck was heading down the highway. There was a student driver, newly hired by Warner and trained, and there was an instructor, rainy, cold kind of weather. But there was a separated highway, okay? So a divider in the middle of the two opposing two-lane highways, and a pickup truck coming in the opposite direction from Warner spun out on the bad conditions and jumped across the center divide and hit the Warner truck head on, and the occupants were killed. On the surface, you look at that case, the facts of the case, and say, gee, what could Warner have done? The pickup truck came across a divided highway and hit the Warner truck in an oncoming lane. And yet the plaintiff's attorney in that case, while there was some focus on the facts of the case, they really went deeper and tried to dig in and damage the reputation of the motor carriers. And that's really the theory behind these nuclear attacks by the Reptile, using the Reptile theory. The Reptile theory is really based on the fact that we have two brains, two sides to our brain. We have the intelligent brain, maybe, and the forward-thinking brain, and we have the old brain. And the old brain really is focused on survival. It's focused on threats. It's focused on being able to get food and continue your existence and things of that nature. So very base elements and emotions. And what the Reptile theory does, it focuses in on that part of the human's brain and the jury and tries to get the jury inflamed, angered, fearful, and trying to put the jury in the place of the person that might potentially be injured by this company, who they paint as a profit-oriented, no concern about safety, doesn't follow its own practices and rules. And so they go after the motor carrier in a number of ways. I frequently will pose it as you have a house and a foundation, and a lot of times you'll put screens at the bottom of your house, wherever those openings are, to keep rodents and animals from coming into your house. And the reptile attack really looks for openings in your house to come in and try to break those barriers and damage your reputation. And that's really the basis, I think, of that attack. It's not completely focused on the facts of the case. It's more focused on things that the motor carrier does or doesn't do or does poorly that the plaintiff used to inflame the jury and get these kind of big awards with big punitive damages.
And using the example that you used, the Warner case, just to be clear for the audience, the pickup truck was in its own lane and then crossed a divided highway to go head on into the Warner truck, who apparently was doing nothing wrong.
Yes, under the speed limit, as a matter of fact.
Well, when I say not doing anything wrong, though, the lawyers convinced the jury otherwise.
Yeah, I think the argument was that although the Warner truck was going slower than the posted speed, the jury felt that the speed of the Warner truck should have been even slower. And perhaps maybe the driver, being a new driver to the industry, shouldn't have even been out in the kind of conditions that were present that day. So there were some extenuating issues there. But again, primarily it was an attack on Warner as a company. Accidents happen in trucking and in traffic. They happen. And trucking companies are generally ready to address those and to pay for the damage done and pay for the medical expenses and take care of people when there's been a tragic situation. But these punishments that are brought down in many cases are so obscene from a financial standpoint that they're not only impacting the trucking company, they're impacting the general consumer as well. These large jury verdicts against companies like Warner impact the cost of transportation. They impact how goods get to the store shelves for people to buy. It's an economic damage to many things, not just the company at fault.
And the unfortunate aspect is a lot of these awards aren't even based on the crash itself.
Yes,
They've taken the whole thing out of context and pointed the carrier into a bad light that has no relation to the crash itself, which is a shame.
Absolutely.
And we're seeing that. Now, I believe there are a number of U.S. states that are starting to change that a little bit and not allow the reptile theory to be played, or they're capping the maximums that can be sued for.
There is some activity going on in the U.S. court system, and it's a very splintered system in the United States of 50, different state jurisdictions. And then our federal system is broken down into a series of districts that sometimes are favorable to defendants, other times favorable to plaintiffs. And so it can be a little confusing. And I'll tell you another thing that's really being looked at today very closely that relates to this topic is third-party funding of these lawsuits.
Yes.
Yes.
I've heard about a lot of this. Yeah.
This private equity has found their way into the U.S. judicial system and are actually funding these cases when a good one comes along, what they consider to be a good one. And so outside money is being used to pay for and promote a plaintiff's suit against trucking companies.
Yeah.
And in many cases, it's unbeknownst to the jury because in certain court jurisdictions, it's not permissible to disclose that information. So there are some jurisdictions that are fighting that concept and forcing notice on the court to at least let the jurors know that this case is in large part being funded by an outside party. No interest in the case other than financial. And the counter argument from the people financing is, it's not for our involvement. Might not have an even bar. They might not have an even opportunity to bring litigation in a case that's warranted. But it's a specious argument. I think they generally live in the cloak of darkness and don't want the light shined on them. But it's a terrible injustice to the trucking companies and to a court system to allow outside unrelated funding of a lawsuit. Nature. So, and tort reform comes about slowly. The old stuff, not wanting to watch sausage being made. Watching tort reform being made is even more painful. Really a slow, arduous process that is going to take a long time to really straighten away in the United States.
Well, there's a lot of attorneys who don't want tort reform, that they like the system the way it is now.
And if you look at some of the judges and some of the people that are in office, the primary contributors to their campaigns and war chests and funds are plaintiff attorneys.
Now, before we go on, let's define what a nuclear verdict is. Do you want to handle that one?
Sure. A nuclear verdict generally is figured at an award of in excess of $10 million. So any award that exceeds $10 million, it's considered a nuclear verdict.
And I don't know about the US. You might have some knowledge here, Bob, but in Canada, there's not many trucking companies that I know of that carry insurance for more than 10 million.
Yeah. Yeah, that's certainly true. And if you look at the marketplace and in prior years until this nuclear issue, which has really exploded in the last 15 years or so, there were a number of insurance carriers that were providing pieces of that tier or tower of insurance. And yes, as you go up that tower or tier of insurance in the U.S., it's becoming increasingly more difficult to find insurers willing to take on those slices of exposure. Given the current marketplace in the court system, it's nuclear verdicts. So getting coverage is getting really difficult. And it's not infrequent that a motor carrier is faced with a lawsuit where the plaintiff immediately comes out and tries to anchor a number with the jury. And one of the first things they'll do in a courtroom setting is anchor something in the jury's mind as far as the award. And typically that anchor is probably at their cap of whatever their insurance coverage is. So if they're covered for 10 million, they're covered for 15 million. That opening argument usually starts out with an anchor very close to that number because that's their target. Big multi-faceted and multi-asseted companies face a little different problem in this regard, but the smaller truck companies, you have a nuclear verdict of 10, 12, 15, $20 million against you. You're essentially handing over the keys to the trucking company, and very unlikely that judgment will ever be paid.
Well, go ahead, John.
I was just going to say, it's an unfortunate situation that we find ourselves in. Insurance companies, I've been working with two large insurance companies for the last 20 years. And interesting enough, it's not the award that scares them. It's the carriers that are not mindful of what they're doing and managing their risk that scares them because they have the potential to turn into that award much quicker than somebody who does a very good job of managing their risk. So,
John, have you been reading my mail?
Yes, exactly.
Yes, thanks for the lead in because I have a perfect solution to that problem.
Perfect. I'd love to hear more about it.
Yeah, exactly. I hear exactly what you're saying. When we first, and maybe this is a segue a little bit into our Bluewire product, but when we initially developed the first product of our two products, it was directed at the motor carrier world. And the years of background on the private fleet side and Steve's 50 or 20 on the for hire side, we thought, oh, gee, the motor carrier is going to run to us, because we had a really good solution to point out to them where these vulnerabilities to these plaintiff attacks come from. And Attree did a really good job of defining probably the top 10 issues that pop up that when they're present in a court case, almost 90+% of the time, the plaintiff gets a verdict. And so we designed our software around those 10 detonators, or what we call attack vectors. In the cybercrime world, a company will hire an outside consultant to come in and try to break into their system, infiltrate their system. They call them white hat hackers. So it's a good guy hacker. Okay. And we kind of developed their software around that same concept. And we wanted to be the white hat plaintiff's attorneys and help you find out or understand where that vulnerability exists. It's a marketing gig for us, but when you see Steve at a conference anywhere around the U.S., he's typically got his white hat Stetson on with the Bluewire, and I've got mine at the ready. But it's the motor carrier product. When we first went out, we were getting reactions from some of the motor carriers. See, my company's in really good shape. I don't think I really need your product. Or B, the nuclear verdicts only happen in 6% of the cases that go to trial. Blah blah blah. I'm not going to worry about it. And the third one, which was the most unbelievable for me, was I don't want to know what I don't know.
Yeah.
Because if I know what I don't know, I might actually have to go out and fix it or do something about it. Gosh, John, that just speaks to what you pointed out. That's what keeps the insurance companies up at night. Exactly. The company they're insuring who has that kind of an attitude of, don't tell me when I don't know because I might have to actually do something about it.
Very much.
Or the safety department that doesn't want to hear about an exciting new technology because they're afraid that word of some hole or missing piece in their approach or program reaches the C-suite of the company they work for.
Right.
So while some of these conflicts were going on in our sales and marketing, we heard a ring at the back of our house. And when I went to answer the door and Steve and I opened the door, who was there? The insurance industry, John. And they were knocking on our door saying, gee, what you have developed in the way of this program for motor carriers is really an exciting product and really looks at those things that keep us up at night from an exposure standpoint. But here's the problem, guys. We're only able to look at one motor carrier at a time here. We need to coordinate with the carrier to look at their program. So Steve put his head together with Peter Rowe, our information technology head and guru, and with myself and Doug Marcello, our legal defense attorney partner of ours. And the thought was, hey, could we score the whole industry? Mm-hmm. And so Peter came up with a way to go out and apply a Bluewire score to every motor carrier registered with the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, 760,000 plus motor carriers. Wow. And we have scored the entire industry with our GAP score, which is a component score built of 9 individual scores, weighted, rolled up into a single Bluewire score, kind of like a credit score, but it's not a safety dashboard or a safety score. It is very specifically directed towards that one item, and that is, what is your exposure to one of these reptile attacks, one of these reptile theory cases wherein someone could poke into your house and find a glaring systematic failure on your part in something that really needs to be handled better.
Wow. And I'm not sure you want to answer this question. You can defer to John, which will be no answer. If you've scored the whole industry from the DOT point of view, from everybody who has a DOT number, basically,
right,
do you have any idea of a percentage as to what percentage of the industry is open or susceptible to a reptile theory attack by a plaintiff attorney?
Interesting question. As we look at the entire scoring mechanism and what we consider to be acceptable scores in various categories and a rolled up score, I would say that in general, about 82 to 85% of the motor carriers will have a DOT number and are authorized for carriage. And that includes Canadian-based carriers that come into the U.S. and operate in the U.S. So there are a number of big ones. Yep. But so we think there's probably 15 to 18% of the DOT population that has a substantial exposure to that kind of an attack.
Yep. Wow, that number is much better than I envisioned. Quite honestly, I thought it would be the majority would be open to that type of an attack.
No, the industry does a really good job in most cases on compliance and regulatory things. And the U.S. marketplace is made up of a number of small carriers. I think that the number is somewhere in the neighborhood, like over 92 or 3% of the fleets, the DOT numbers in the United States represent 10 trucks or less. And yet the top 10% of the DOT numbers probably represent 40% of all the power units in the country. So there's a little bit of a dichotomy there, but a lot of small fleets and some of those have exposure.
Yeah. But, one of the dilemmas that we have here at Great Lake North is we're probably not likely ever going to see a nuclear verdict here on Canadian soil. Lawyers have informed us the way our legal system is structured and whatnot, we're just not going to see those kind of rewards. And I think one of the problems that us as risk managers see, and I think Chris can attest to this as well, is when we go out and work with customers, they know this and they think this, yet they're operating in the U.S. And it's, hang on, guys, you might not be subject to a nuclear verdict here in Canada, but look to the south. You're operating in that jurisdiction. You are susceptible to that. And if you don't clean up your act, and I'm thinking of companies off the top of my head that are probably in that 15% category you're talking about, that if they don't clean up their act, you are going to be one of those statistics.
John,
absolutely.
Bob, just before you proceed, I once asked, this is several years ago, the OTA, the Ontario Trucking Association, I said, what percentage of your members cross border? And they said somewhere around 80%. And the other stat I'd like to throw out there, many years ago when I worked for a trucking insurance company, and they specialized in cross-border fleets, but 80% of those miles were in the US because most of them were Southern Ontario and their job is to get into the US. And that's where it was. To your point, John, they are certainly open to nuclear verdicts, these people. Sorry, Bob, go ahead.
No, absolutely. And our software really looks at the facts, circumstances, crashes, out of service violations, other things that Canadian carriers experience south of the border. Okay. We're not tracking intraprovincial information in Canada yet. The Canada hasn't really made their transport industry data as public as the U.S. has. So
good luck. See if you can make it happen, Bob.
I'd like to turn it down after that, John. To speak the truth, I had a personal situation in 2007 when I was on a Harley Davidson in Alberta on the Icefield Parkway, about 11 kilometers south of Jasper. And I had a Werner-like event where a young man headed back to school in Spokane, fell asleep at the wheel, drifted across the center line and hit me head on at 65 miles an hour. And I was genevaced out to Edmonton and spent time in hospital care there for quite a while before coming home in a body cast. But I frequently lamented the fact that my case ultimately against the party that injured me took place in Alberta instead of in Wyoming or California. And because the outcome of that case has been substantially different. So yes, Canadian carriers that are operating in the U.S. have the same exposure as the U.S. carrier based in Chicago, Florida, Texas, or Los Angeles. So yeah, absolutely something to be thinking about.
Now, as we wrap up this interview, because we are getting close to the end, can you tell us how will Bluewire help me as a trucking company or as an insurance company? The two products that you do have, how are they going to help me and why should I consider getting them?
Sure. I think from an insurance company standpoint, a broker, an underwriting company, we have captive insurance companies that are using the product. We have state trucking associations that have subscribed to the product. We've got vendors that subscribe to the product. We'll see which motor carriers have problems with which issues, and they use it from a sales forecasting standpoint. Yep. But I think most importantly, that insurance product gives the insurance company a look over their entire herd of insurance. So let's say an insurance carrier's got 800 trucking companies in their book of business. They're able to really look at 800 carriers on a regular basis with 12 monthly updates throughout the year. They can see the differences and the changes in their scores, whether they're up, whether they're down, which one of the attack vectors their suffering is, so they can focus some attention there. So that's really a valuable product for them. And on the motor carrier side, it's a much deeper dive into data for the carrier. The same 9 attack vectors, but the carrier really is able to look at those. That software makes recommendations to the motor carrier to tell them, you have a deficiency in this particular attack vector. Here's our recommendation as Bluewire to a company that might be able to help you with that problem. And we then point them towards 6 or 7 of our partners in any one of those vectors that can help them solve or improve that problem and thereby enhance their Bluewire score. And we have a component in the software that recognizes their beyond compliance activity too, so that the motor carriers are able to share what they do beyond what's required by law. The installation of camera systems, all the ADAS systems that are put on the trucks these days, lane departure warning and intuitive cruise control and automatic braking systems and the like. And we give them credit on the system of medals. And we also track the financial impact that investment is, so that when a plaintiff attorney is trying to convince a jury that you're a poorly organized company, that you're only profit oriented and you don't care about safety, you're able to point out that, hey, I have over $2.5 million of beyond compliance activity that I've done to ensure that my trucks and my drivers and my company is safe when out motoring with the general public. And it's a very strong argument to be able to put the true story in the true narrative. And that's the last piece of our software is you can roll up all of the data and a lot of the facts that our software determines into a narrative about the company to tell the true story of who that company is. And that report can be very helpful to people in a court setting or for defense attorneys to kind of get up to speed on who this company really is that we're talking about here. Because frankly, the plaintiff's image of who the company is versus who the company really is can be vastly different.
Yeah. I'm just going to add in one last thing there. A well-known plaintiff attorney, I think we all know Joe Freed, a very great educator. I love listening to him talk. He's a shark in the water, but he's also the guy that will come out, get on the beach, have a conversation with you, tell you what he's going to come after, and teach you what not to do. But if you are going to be an idiot and just leave yourself wide open in court, then he's going for the jugular.
Sure. Obviously, not all plaintiff attorneys are bad, and not all of them, are reptile and billboard thirsty attorneys. Many of them are very legitimate and try to bring justice in cases where justice is due. But frankly, some of the tactics that are used in some of these asks and decisions are just so out of line and so ridiculous that it really is an explosion of nuclear problems. And you may wonder where the Blue Wire name came from, but it really stems from a movie, Lethal Weapon, with Mel Gibson and Danny Glover. And there's a scene where they're inside of a parking garage and there's a bomb inside the car, and Mel Gibson is trying to decide whether to cut the blue wire or the red wire. And
That's good.
He was going to cut the blue wire, and at the last minute, he tells Roger, "No, I'm going to cut the red." And he cuts the red, and when he does, the clock starts ticking, and Mel Gibson realizes the bomb's about to blow, and he yells over to Danny Glover, "Roger, grab the cat," and they go running out of the place. Of course, it blows up. And I have to give all credit to my partner, Steve Bryan, on that one. That was his genius stroke to name the company Blue Wire after that scene. So, yeah, if you don't leave your garage to blow up with you and your cat inside, give us a call.
Yeah,
exactly. I think that's a great place to wrap it up.
Yeah.
I've got to emphasize, though, that the Blue Wire product, from what you were just telling us, can really help a carrier and an insurance company, but I'm more focused on the carrier, identify the areas that they should be able to improve in. But I also I think it's a great way the Blue Wire product also can help them keep track of the monies that they spend to prove that they are an outstanding carrier. They're not just in it for the dollar, that they really give a shit about safety and they spend the money the way they think is best. I think that's huge, and it gives the defense attorney a huge leg up on defending in this reptile theory, which is, anyways, I hate the reptile.
In closing, I'll say that the pricing issue is that the motor carrier product that we have is priced in such a way that it really is less than 0.5% of the typical cost to insure a power unit. So it's very reasonable. It's a very small slice of what the insurance exposure is for that truck from a premium standpoint. We think it's really kept in supplier. So we've got a lot of interesting and great companies on our list of customers and subscribers, and that's growing every day. And excited about where we're going with the product and our partners that are coming along with us.
And Bob, your contact information is in the show notes down below. So
yes,
I hope that people that are interested will reach out to Bob at Blue Wire and get the scoop and investigate this, because I think it's a huge advantage. And John and I are not getting paid for that, but I think it's a huge advantage. Thanks, Bob, for coming on the Trucking Risk and Insurance podcast.
Great. We'll keep things like this up, Chris. Safety Dawg does a great job of bringing these kind of industry issues out so that people can have a forum, talk about them, understand them better, get a deeper dive in. You guys do a fabulous job. I've been on your site. I've watched a number of the podcasts on there. They're really great. They give you a lot of good information firsthand about a trucking topic that you might not be 100% familiar with. And Blue Wire and myself, very happy to be part of your library here, and just love both you guys and appreciate what you're doing for the industry. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you. I got to thank Bob from Blue Wire for joining us, because that is an innovative product. So that's it for this week on the Trucking Risk and Insurance podcast. Join us next week where we have another guest coming up, and it will be informative and enlightening. Thanks so much. John and I are gone.